Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Town of Halton Hills virtual open house on the Scope Glen Williams Secondary Plan Review Project. My name is Melissa Ricci, and I'm a senior policy planner with the town. Today, our lead consultant, Dana Anderson from MHBC Consulting, will be presenting information about the background report and outlining key areas for input related to the secondary plan review. During the presentation, you will have the opportunity to answer a number of polling questions and have your say on the goals and objectives of the secondary plan. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer session, and at any time during or after the presentation, you will have the opportunity to submit questions using the Q&A function of your webinar screen. We will do our best to get to all the questions and answer them live after the presentation, including the ones we received in advance. Don't worry if you don't hear your specific question during the session. We will record all the questions we received from this event and post the answers on Let's Talk Halton Hills. Also here with us from MHBC Consulting is Melinda McRoy, who is going to moderate the question and answer session and assist with questions. John Linhart, Commissioner of Planning and Development, and as well as a number of technical staff are also on the panel to participate in answering your questions. I am pleased to advise that Mayor Rick Bonnet is viewing this open house along with Councillor Somerville, Councillor Albano, Councillor Lawler, Councillor Lewis, and Councillor Brown. You will not be able to hear from them during the presentation or the Q&A session, but be assured that they will be listening to any questions you may have. Thank you to the almost 30 people who took the online survey during the project launch event in the summer. A summary of your input will be shared with you today. This session will be recorded, so anyone that's unable to join us can watch it later. Thank you again for participating tonight, and we hope that you find the session very informative. I'm now going to turn this over to Councillor Brown, who is the chair of our steering committee for the project and will provide some opening remarks.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Good evening and welcome to the Scope Glen Williams Secondary Plan Review virtual open house. The Glen Williams work plan for the review of the secondary plan was identified by Council as a priority in 2017 and consists of two phases: the Glen Williams Mature Neighborhood Study and the scoped Glen Williams Secondary Plan. The Mature Neighborhood Study was completed in 2019, and this spring we initiated the scoped Glen Williams Secondary Plan Review project. The purpose of the scoped review is to ensure that the secondary plan, which was approved in 2007, complies with regional and provincial legislation and to address recent key community concerns. This evening, the project team is here to give an update on the project, provide you with information about the key findings of the background report, and get your input into the process. We thank you for your participation and hope you enjoy the virtual open house. And back to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. And now I'm going to pass it over to Dana, who's going to start the presentation.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Councillor Brown, for those opening remarks. I would love to say that I am coming to you live from the Glen this evening, but my substitute is a beautiful photograph from about 4 years ago. And I wish, again, I was in the Glen and I could share the open house with you live tonight, but virtually, I think we'll get through all the information and have an opportunity to hear from you and respond to a number of your questions. So good evening and welcome to the Glen Williams Scope Secondary Plan Review Open House. As noted, my name is Dana Anderson. I'm a planner with MHBC Planning, and our firm, together with WSP Consulting firm, are working together with the town on this scoped secondary plan review. And as was noted by the councillor, the purpose of tonight's session is to provide you with an update on the secondary plan review process, to talk a little bit about the background report that has been prepared and is now available as well on the town's Let's Talk Halton Hills website. And also, most importantly, to gather some initial feedback from you on some of the areas of the plan that are under review, and also to find out more information about the process as it goes forward. So tonight's presentation is broken down into an overview, first and foremost, of the study purpose and process, talking a little bit about some of the initial feedback that we received from the project launch back in April and the survey questions that were put out. A little bit about the background report, which is an overview of the physical and policy context that applies to the Glen and the areas of study that we've looked into with some key findings and some considerations. And we'll be providing a high-level overview of that when we get to the areas for review and feedback section of the open house. And we'll also be speaking to you tonight about the goals and objectives of the current plan and conducting some live polling questions on some of those goals and objectives to get some of your initial feedback. And then, as Melissa indicated, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers, and also a link to where you can find additional information about tonight's presentation, as well as the background report and the next steps in the process. So with that, I wanted to start off with a quick recap in terms of the purpose of the study and the process that we're undertaking with the town and the community. And so why is the secondary plan being reviewed? And Councillor Brown spoke to that in terms of direction from Council about the update to the secondary plan and the first phase of the study being the mature neighborhood study. And so the existing secondary plan for Glen Williams was approved back in 2007. And plans have a lifespan or a life cycle, which provides a target date for growth within the plan. And that current planning horizon goes to 2021. And so since the plan was first approved, there have been a number of changes to both provincial and regional policies, which require all local plans to be reviewed and updated to ensure conformity with those upper tier regional and provincial plans. And we also know that since the initial plan was approved, there have been a number of changes in the Glen in terms of growth that has come forward. And there's also been a number of planning matters and issues and concerns that have been raised from the community with the intention of being reviewed with this update to the plan. And so the scoped review of this plan is very timely, and it will enable the town to respond to the planning issues and concerns, as well as ensure that the local plan is in conformity with all required policies and regulations. So what is being reviewed as part of a scoped review? And one of the questions that was asked initially through our project launch was, what is the difference between a scoped review and a new plan? We're certainly not undertaking a new plan. The current secondary plan has a policy framework where it sets out land use designations and policies around a number of areas. And we're certainly going to work within that planning framework to review the current policies, the objectives, the goals of the plan to determine if there are changes that need to be undertaken in those areas, as well as some of the more detailed policies and areas to ensure conformity again and consistency with the provincial and regional policies, and also to identify where new policies need to be added. And so one of the other questions is what area of the plan is being reviewed? And this map illustrates the secondary plan boundaries for the Glen. And this is the area that we will be focusing within. We are not expanding this boundary. We are working within this boundary, and we'll be updating the mapping and policies as it relates to this area. So in terms of study process, I wanted to spend a little bit of time at the beginning of the presentation just to provide an overview of the study process and the work program, and really to highlight for the community those key areas where public consultation and engagement will occur. It's not to say that engagement will not occur throughout the entire process, because it definitely will, but there are some key dates and key open houses and sessions that are going to occur within each phase of the study. We've just recently completed phase 1 of the study, and this was an undertaking of all the background research, both technical and the policy analysis, and I'll speak a little bit more about that when I get to the background report. But certainly we've undertaken that work and completed, and that work has been culminated in the draft background report, which is available online. And as part of that background report, we identified a number of key findings and also areas for further consideration within the plan. And we're now into phase 2, which is really the community visioning and presenting some information to you, but more importantly, getting your feedback and input into those areas that are under review, and collecting that information from you this evening, and also through additional surveys and questions that I'll speak to at the end of the presentation around areas of the plan. And then we move into a phase where we start to collect all of the technical information, all of the community and public feedback, stakeholder feedback, and we start to draft the update to the secondary plan. And that draft will go through a public open house, and it will also be presented as an update to council. And then we'll, in the final phase of the study, start refining that secondary plan, and again, go through a public process with presentations at a community open house, and finally present that plan for consideration at a statutory public meeting to council. I think it's also important to note that throughout this study process, there's iterative stages where we're actually meeting with what's called a TAC, or a Technical Advisory Committee. And that's a large group made up of various representatives from staff from both the town departments as well as the region and other agencies. And also iteratively, we're meeting with a steering committee, and that's a committee made up of representatives from council as well as members of the community. So as we're going through each step and collecting information and presenting information, we're getting direct input and feedback from both of those groups as well as the community at large. So as Melissa indicated, we launched the project back in April of this year. And again, due to the COVID restrictions, that launch event was held virtually, and it's still available, the initial presentation. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't taken a look at that presentation. It provides some good insight again into the study process. And as a result of that launch event, we asked for members of the community to provide us with comments around a number of areas of the plan that we will be looking at. And these include cultural heritage, servicing, urban design, natural heritage, land use, parks and trails, growth management, sustainability. And right off the end of my page, I think it says, I can't see, sorry, my apologies, transportation. And as a result of the feedback that we got, it's clear to see that all of these areas of the plan are very important to the community. And certainly cultural heritage, servicing, land use, and transportation are areas where a number of comments were provided from the community in terms of the importance of looking into these areas as part of the secondary plan review. So as I mentioned early in the presentation, we prepared a background report. And this is often during the first phase of a study to compile information about the area, both in terms of the historic development of the area, of which the Glen has a rich history and development, as well as the physical context. And that would include existing development as well as all the natural features and the cultural heritage features. We also, during the initial stage of the process, as I mentioned, got initial input from the community, and we've summarized that in the background report. We also undertake a review and analysis of all of the policies and regulations that would apply to development within the Glen. And that includes policies at the provincial level, the regional level, and the local level, as well as policies and regulations that are applicable from other agencies, including the Conservation Authority. Part of the background report also looks at a number of ongoing studies, past studies, and initiatives that have implications for the policies that, again, direct and provide direction for land use within the Glen. And so we've identified those studies and highlighted some of the key findings and areas that we need to look at in terms of implementing some additional updates to policies. And finally, we looked at the existing secondary plan in detail and did an assessment of the current policies. And there's a list here of all of those policies. And those are when I refer to the areas of the secondary plan that we were looking at in some detail. And as a result of that assessment of those existing areas, as well as all the provincial, regional, and local policies and studies and initiatives, we prepared a summary of the key findings for each of the areas and noted areas for further consideration. And so those areas for review and feedback, we are presenting this evening, highlighting them this evening, but I would encourage you to go to the background report. There is an executive summary, which will give you a good indication of more of the detail as we go through the presentation tonight. So I wanted to start off with one of the areas tonight is to present to the community the existing goals and the objectives within the secondary plan. And certainly the current goal of the secondary plan, and I'll just read it now, is that the overall goal of the Glen Williams secondary plan is to ensure the retention and enhancement of the natural, cultural, and heritage resources of the hamlet, and to guide so that it contributes and does not detract from the compact character of the hamlet in an environmentally protective and cost-effective manner. And we're interested to find out, based on this goal, and there's a polling question that's going to come up, and I'll explain how you can participate in the poll. We're interested in finding out from you your thoughts on this goal. And so we're going to ask the following 2 questions related to this goal. And if you need to, you can move the pop-up screen over so that you can sort of see the goal when you're responding to the question. But the 2 questions we'd like to ask and get your initial feedback on. Firstly, the overall goal is to ensure the retention and enhancement of natural, cultural, and heritage resources of the hamlet. And we want to know from you if this goal is still generally relevant to the Glen. And secondly, which components of the goal are most important to you? And please feel free to choose more than one. And those components we've summarized as natural heritage resources, cultural heritage resources, the character of the hamlet, and also that change within the hamlet occurs in an environmentally protective manner. So if I could ask those who are participating to take a few seconds just to respond to those questions, and we'll have a look at the responses and the poll results in a minute. I'm hoping we're getting close. There's actually a small little meter for the person that's administering the poll. Oh, there's a large number. Thanks, Dahlia. Excellent. So interesting. So an interesting response to this first polling question. It seems a majority of the people believe that the school is still relevant, but certainly there's a few individuals who feel it is not. And really interesting feedback in relation to which of the goals are the most important. And I think it's fair to say that, again, a number of people feel very strongly, certainly of the first 4. And there's also a number that feel all of the above are important in terms of the goal. So this is good information and feedback for us. And as we're starting to look at refining the goal and providing for additional input, these responses are of great assistance to us. So thank you for that. So I'd like to just move now to some of the objectives in the plan. And these are set out in the existing plan, and I won't read through them in detail, but certainly the objectives speak to the boundary of the plan in terms of permitting limited growth and specifically preserving the hamlet's scale and character while protecting the natural areas. The objectives speak to the importance of preserving the unique heritage character of the Glen, also preserving a delicate balance between development and the protection of environmental features and functions. The objectives speak to the importance of visual and physical access to open space, providing improved linkages to commercial and community facilities in the hamlet core area, enhancing the vitality of the commercial core, maintaining and enhancing and restoring the health of the natural environment, ensuring subdivision design incorporates a variety of lot sizes, also speaking to the methods of water and wastewater servicing. Other objectives include encouraging architectural styles that are consistent with the character, addressing a range of housing needs, and also providing for growth where it can be shown not to create any negative fiscal impacts. Also, an environmental framework which serves both existing and future community, which is formed by linking open space, natural features, and parks with the developed areas. And finally, maintaining and enhancing the character of the mature neighborhood areas to ensure new housing and replacement housing is compatible and respectful of character. And we know that that last objective was something that was added through an amendment to the plan through the mature neighborhood study. So a quick polling question related to the objectives. So these two questions relate to the objectives of the plan. And the first one is, what are your thoughts on the existing objectives of the plan? All still relevant? No need to update? Are they all still relevant but missing some important topics, or no longer relevant? And then secondly, the objectives of the plan address a number of elements. And if folks could take a look and indicate what elements are the most important to you. And again, please feel free to choose more than one. And they're listed here: growth management, heritage character, the natural environment, open space, access to commercial and community facilities, the vitality of the core, development and design, servicing, fiscal impacts of growth, and the mature neighborhood areas. So again, if those that are participating could take a few seconds to just go through those and provide us your responses, and we'll take a look at the results in a minute. I almost feel like I should have some nice background music while people are answering the survey questions. So I think people are still working away at responding, which is great. Excellent. So interesting. There are certainly responses here indicating probably majority of people feel they are still relevant, not a need to update, but a few people are indicating that there are some important topic areas that should be considered. And certainly a few people that also feel that some of them are not, some of the objectives are no longer relevant. In terms of the areas, sort of the elements that are discussed in the objectives, this is really interesting. Clearly growth management, the natural environment, and character are certainly appearing to be those areas that for most of the participants are the most important to them. And again, this is not to suggest that those other areas are not relevant or not of importance. It's just indicating from the community those areas that are most important to you. So it's important for us to know in terms of looking at these various objectives as they relate to the secondary plan. So thank you very much for that. So I'd like to move now into just a very high level summary of, as I mentioned, those areas of the plan that we are reviewing. And we've provided them in the initial launch, as well as in the background report and in this presentation, utilizing a number of symbols with those key policy areas. And I'm going to go through them this evening as part of the open house, giving you a very high level summary and at the end of a few of them, asking a few polling questions. But we would really encourage people to go to the Let's Talk Halton Hills website, where you can find almost a mini presentation on each of these areas that talks about what are these areas, and provides you with an overview. And it also gives you a more detailed summary from the background report and from some of the feedback as to the key findings, as well as areas for further review and consideration. And then it also provides an opportunity for you to respond to some questions in relation to each of these areas. So in addition to the polling questions, we have an opportunity for you online to review this material in detail and provide us with some additional feedback. So I'm going to start by going through the area of growth management and land use. And these, obviously, from the feedback we just received on the objectives, are two very important areas of the plan for consideration. And so in terms of growth management, we know that since the plan was approved, just under 100 new lots have been created within the Glen through draft plans of subdivision. And we know that the population has grown by about 338 people for a total population now of just over 1,700. And so through our background work and initial feedback, we know that some of the areas for further review include current and future growth needs and how growth and new development will be addressed and accommodated within the policies, and also in relation to servicing and servicing capacity. And that growth and growth management also has to be considered in the context of the provincial and the regional policies. The most important thing with growth management is to update the policies to identify the direction for where and how new growth is to be managed. In terms of land use, the current secondary plan has schedules that identify different types of land uses, and those land use designations provide for permitted uses and policies around different land use designations. And so we know from our key findings that there are some land uses that don't align with the land use designations. There may be uses that have been existing for some time that are not currently permitted in the plan, and also don't align with the implementing zoning. And we know there are some boundaries to those land use designations that need to be refined. Certainly in terms of our findings and some of the areas for further review, we need to provide some alignment in relation to those boundaries and designations. And we also want to look at the existing land use framework for the Glen and the terms that are used and ensure that they are conforming and consistent with provincial, regional, and also the town's official plan for the entire town of Halton Hills to ensure that we identify any gaps and make sure there's conformity. We also want to look specifically at the policy framework as it addresses issues of density, lot standards, and urban design criteria for different residential areas. And again, specific to character. So we have a quick polling question related to growth management and land use. And so in relation to growth management and land use, I'd like to know from those that are participating in the further review of policies for growth management and land use, which areas are the most important to you? And so we listed them here as servicing capacity, the location of future development, the character of future development, the density of future development, or all of the above. And again, please take a few seconds just to choose one or more of those that are the most important for you in terms of our review of these policies. I think folks are just finishing up. Interesting. So clearly, I think most people, or just close to 50%, have indicated that all of the above are important in terms of land use and growth management. And certainly we know that all of these components of the policies are very important for us as part of the review and further discussion with the community. So thank you for that. I'm going to move now to the three areas of policies that relate to natural heritage, servicing and stormwater management, as well as sustainability. In terms of our background report, some of the key findings, clearly we identified the natural areas that are within the Glen. You can see them identified on the map on the left-hand side of the screen. And we know that given the Glen's context with the Credit River, that there is regulatory mapping for the floodplains. And we certainly know that there are a significant number of natural heritage system features and areas that are currently mapped and also mapped through provincial, regional, local, and conservation authority policies and regulations. We know that in terms of these policies, there are updates that are needed in terms of the terminology in the secondary plan, which needs to be consistent with those other policy documents. We also know that there is some mapping that needs to be, identified in terms of consistency as well. And there's also policies that relate to setback guidelines that are currently prescribed in the secondary plan that need to be updated in relation to current guidelines and regulations. In terms of servicing and stormwater management, in the background report, we know that the area of the Glen is serviced by a combination of private, partial, and full municipal services. We also know that all future development is required to be on full municipal services. And we also know that stormwater management for recent development, there's a variety of approaches that have been considered in accordance with various ministry, town, and conservation authority criteria. So some of the areas for further review, we know we have to address some of the recommendations and requirements from the subwatershed study that was recently undertaken. And we also know that we have to review and update some of the conservation authorities' mapping and policies relating to floodplains. And part of our update to the policy framework is to address some of the issues in relation to servicing and ensure that there are appropriate policies to address new development in relation to servicing and stormwater management. And finally, in terms of sustainability, we know the town has certainly been a leader in relation to sustainability, both policies and programs and practices. And we know as part of our review that we need to update the secondary plan policy framework to align with policies at the provincial, regional level, as well as the town's policies and programs relating to sustainability. We need to update that secondary plan policy framework to reference these recent plans and strategies and ensure there's direction and guidance on sustainable growth and development within the secondary plan, as well as looking at guidelines to implement the best practices from a lot of the work that the town has already done. So I'd now like to just ask a quick polling question related to servicing and sustainability and natural heritage. So in terms of the Glen's natural area policies, sustainability and servicing, what are the most important areas for further review? And again, please feel free to choose more than one, identifying the ones that are most important to you. Is it updated policies and mapping of environmental features, the inclusion of policies on sustainability to allow it to align, with the town-wide initiatives, updated policies on stormwater management to address drainage and flooding, updated policies on the future servicing and capacity, or all of the above? I'll give people a few seconds to respond. Interesting. So interesting results. Stormwater management, drainage, and flooding, certainly an important area for review, and we're seeing that with the response, as well as the mapping of the environmental features. And again, not to indicate that those other two areas are not significant, but certainly we can see the importance of certainly the natural features and the stormwater management matters that need to be addressed with the updated policies. I'd now like to move on to parks and open space and trails, which is again an area of the policies within the secondary plan that we are undertaking a review of. And we certainly know that the Glen is served by a number of parks and open spaces and trails. And we certainly know the town's recent active transportation plan, which I understand was recently approved, provides direction for active transportation, including cycling paths and trails. And so some of the areas for further review for us is to actually explore opportunities where additional open space may be available, including updating the trail mapping based on some of the recent updates that have been provided. I know with the community working with the town. We also want to look at providing new design guidance related to parks and trail design, as well as amenity spaces that may be provided within new development areas. And we also want to implement the approval of the active transportation plan as it would relate to the Glen. And certainly an area from the beginning of our poll in terms of importance is transportation. And we know that the current Glen is served by a road network consisting of a number of different arterials and collector roads, as well as local streets. We know that parking was recently studied through the Halton Hills Parking Study. And we know that there are some recommendations for policies and practices that we have reviewed as part of our background, and some of that policy work and updates we will be looking at as part of this section of the policy. And we know that there have been a number of traffic calming and pedestrian safety measures implemented in the hamlet as a result of a past study. And there was a recent update to council on that. So we know that as part of the areas for further review, there's ongoing studies, and as they become available, as well as the most recent studies, active transportation, the transit servicing strategy, and the parking study, that we need to update and revise the current policies that relate to transportation in the secondary plan. So I have a quick polling question related to parks and open space, as well as transportation. And of the areas for review related to open space and transportation, again, which areas are important to you? Updated policies and mapping of trails and open space areas, linking of policies on active transportation with trails, implementation of parking policies and updates from the town's parking study, or an update on policies on the road network and road functions within the Glen, or all of the above. So folks could take a few seconds just to respond to that question. That's great, and interesting that this is sort of an even split between all of these, including all of the above. So certainly of great importance to people is updating policies and mapping on both the open space and trails, as well as transportation, and also addressing roads, road functions, and parking. So good responses, and all clearly areas that we need to review further as part of our update to the policies. So the last two areas of review I'd just like to touch on this evening are related to cultural heritage and urban design. And we know these are certainly two very important issues for the community in terms of their relationship to the character of the Glen. In terms of cultural heritage, we know that there are currently 8 properties that are designated under the Heritage Act, and there are a number of properties, 37, that are listed on the Heritage Register. And we know that some of the areas for further review relate to the importance of the character for the Glen. And we saw this through the mature neighborhood study. We also know we need to look at the options of tools that are available to us in terms of updating policies and providing for new policies as they relate to the protection and conservation of cultural heritage. And there's various tools under the Planning Act, as well as the Heritage Act and the provincial policy statement. There are various ways in which we can do that. So we will be exploring those options and discussing those further with the community. We want to look at the merits as well as looking at specific areas of the Glen and whether or not those can be defined as character areas, and also adding additional policies relating to both heritage and those character areas, and supporting that with a best practice review of how heritage and urban design have been addressed in other secondary plan areas. And in terms of urban design, we know there are current urban design guidelines for the Glen that provide some direction for urban design and heritage. And we believe that there should be consideration to update and provide new policies and/or guidelines for cultural heritage and design, and additional policies and guidelines to address some of the gaps related to areas like sustainability and sustainable design practices, as well as accessibility. And we believe it's also important to look at the specific review of new subdivisions and provide some further clarity around design guidelines within those areas. And so those are two very important areas for the additional review within the secondary plan. So the last polling question for this evening relates to cultural heritage and urban design. And in updating the heritage and urban design policies in the secondary plan, which policy updates and supports are the most important to you? Exploring broader policies and approaches to protecting cultural heritage, defining character areas and updating protections for the character and design throughout the Glen, providing updated heritage and urban design guidelines to support the plan, or all of the above. So for this last polling question, if people could just take a few seconds to respond. Excellent, interesting. Clearly a great importance to all of these areas. And if we look at one in particular, it's defining the character areas and updating the protection for character and design throughout the Glen. So great feedback as we look at those two particular areas of policy as part of the review of the secondary plan. So on that note, thank you so much for walking through those areas and responding to the polling questions. Gives us a lot of good feedback and information about what's important to you around each of those areas. As I mentioned at the outset, there is quite a lot of additional information that's available for your review. We've tried to provide it in some what I'll call bite-sized pieces, so it's not overwhelming. So if there's a particular area of review that's of interest to you, you can use the link to the Let's Talk Halton Hills webpage for the study, and you can click on each of these topic areas. And as I mentioned, there's a small presentation which you can have read aloud, and you'll get additional information about that particular area of review, additional information from the background report as it relates to that area, as well as some survey questions that relate to that key topic area, so we can get some additional feedback from you. And it's also an opportunity for you to provide some additional comments rather than just responding to survey questions. So some of the questions are open-ended, and we really look forward to your feedback in those areas. After the question and answer period of the open house, we will show you a link, a demonstration of how you can access this information and all the information on the Let's Talk Halton Hills website to help navigate you to that. And so with that, I would like to say thank you very much for attending this evening and participating. We really look forward to working with you on the scoped review. And I'll hand it over to Melinda, who's now going to open it up for questions, and she'll explain how that's going to work. But again, thank you, and appreciate your time this evening.
Thanks, Dana. So we will now commence the question and answer period. For those of you who missed the opening remarks from Melissa, I would just like to acknowledge that we have present with us here this evening Mayor Bonnet and a number of councillors, including Councillor Brown, Councillor Somerville, Councillor Albano, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Inglis, Councillor Lawler, and Councillor Vogel. So now we're going to start the Q&A. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A function where you can submit questions, and some people have done so already. We will do our best to get to all of the questions now, but don't worry if you don't hear your specific question during this event. We are recording all of the questions that we receive, and we will be posting the answers on the Let's Talk Halton Hills website. I'd also just like to note that your name will be visible to other attendees, and to avoid showing your name, you will need to check the anonymous option when submitting a question. And we did receive questions in advance to the meeting, so thank you to those for sending them in. I'm going to start with the questions that we did receive from people who submitted prior to the event. And then if we have time, we'll go into the additional questions that we're receiving live through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So the first question that we received was, will this review increase the densities permitted in the Glen? And so I'm going to address this question. So the review will consider if the current densities prescribed in the secondary plan continue to be appropriate for new developments in Glen Williams. We know that one of the strategic goals of the town's official plan is to permit development within hamlets that maintains and enhances the hamlet character. The growth plan also speaks about limiting growth in hamlets and rural settlement areas. And there are a number of objectives in the current secondary plan that speak to how growth in the hamlet should contribute to the compact character of the hamlet. We are looking for input from the community to ensure that these goals and objectives regarding growth and density are still applicable today. And there will be a survey on the growth management component of the secondary plan available on the Let's Talk Halton Hills website, so that you can submit any feedback that you have regarding densities permitted in the Glen directly there. The next question that we've received are, what types of policies can be put in place to minimize traffic in the Glen? So I'll also address this question. The review will be revisiting the existing transportation policies, including policies related to promoting different modes of transportation, such as cycling and walking. And that was something we received as feedback as part of the project launch event as well. And as part of this review, we consider initiatives that the town has already undertaken to implement many traffic calming and pedestrian safety measures in the hamlet, which was a result of the 2009 traffic study and was documented in the update that was brought forward to council in July of this year. In addition, we will be considering the now approved, as of yesterday, active transportation master plan, as well as a review of the ongoing studies, such as the transit service strategy, which is currently in the implementation phase, and the Halton Hills townwide parking study, which is underway and will be finalized in late 2020. The next question that we received is, how can I access more information about the project? So as Dana mentioned, I will be demonstrating what's available on the Let's Talk Halton Hills website. We do encourage you to review the materials that are available after this live session, and then send us your comments or questions if you have any questions that arise from reviewing this material. And I will get to sharing my screen to show you how to access that information at the end. The next question that we received is, why do new developments get to benefit from the sewer systems while all other residents have to pay for septic repair, service, and eventually replacement? So for this question, I'm going to direct it to John Lindhart, the Commissioner of Planning.
Yes, thank you, Melinda. So with the exception of the second phase of the Bishop's Court development, the region requires all new development to occur on full municipal services. And I know Dana did mention that in her presentation. Now, insofar as the existing community goes, the region basically has a provision in place that says that the connection of existing residents will occur when the region determines it to be prudent and feasible. And typically this would be done to address public health or environmental reasons. So we have also reached out to the region very recently and asked them for an update as well as to whether there are any plans in the region's capital program with respect to full services for the rest of the hamlet. So we thank you for your question, and we are following up, looking to get some additional information from the region as they are responsible for water and wastewater servicing. So thank you, Melinda.
Thank you, John. So the next question that we received is regarding the volume of traffic in the Glen. The comment states that I saw in your summary, you mentioned Confederation, Main Street, and Wildwood are collector roads. Wildwood Road is being used as a cut-through road with heavy trucks, including dump trucks that are not allowed on the road. This is a major issue and concern for the residents on this road. It is supposed to be a quiet residential road, but instead it's a branch from Highway 7 to cut through our small village out onto Mayfield, 410 and 401 and beyond. How will these issues be addressed? So that question I'm going to direct to Matt in transportation at the town.
Thank you, Melinda. Good evening, everyone. With respect to Wildwood Road, heavy vehicles are not permitted on Wildwood Road unless they are undertaking local deliveries. The recent activity in heavy vehicles is something that we are, the town and Halton Regional Police Service are trying to address. That is not supposed to happen on that road. With regards to the volume of traffic, the volume of traffic right now as of 2019 on Wildwood Road is about 4,200 vehicles. We understand that there is some cut-through traffic between Highway 7 and Confederation Street, which both of those roads are arterial roads. However, the growth in general on Wildwood Road is about 1.8% for the past 11 years, which is reasonable. Hopefully that addresses the question.
Thank you, Matt. The next question that we received is regarding concern about the lack of sidewalks on Confederation Street north of Main Street. This person walks there regularly and the traffic gets very busy and speedy. They're also concerned about new development going on at 102 Confederation Street and more traffic and pedestrians exiting onto this road on a hill. They ask, will sidewalks be considered as part of this review? And with that, I'm going to direct the question to Maureen, Director of Transportation with the town.
Thanks, Melinda, for the question. And I do understand the concern regarding sidewalks. As part of the development that's going to be happening, we will be looking at sidewalks in coordination with the development. The town currently does have Confederation in the long-term forecast for reconstruction. However, we are hoping that we will be able to move the construction up of Confederation as part of the work that the development is doing, with the anticipation to put sidewalks in to allow pedestrian activity. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Maureen. The next question that we received is, will any future development be on hold until this plan is passed? And I'm going to direct that question again to John, the Commissioner of Planning.
Thank you for the question, Melinda. So we do have a number of applications that are currently before us in Glen Williams, and those applications, in some cases, have been filed for a number of years. One is before what is known as the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, and it will be dealt with through that particular process. The other ones, we are obligated to continue to process those applications. So there are no plans to put any applications specifically on hold at this particular point in time. And thank you for your question.
Thank you, John. The next question we received is, tree cutting for development does not help maintain sustainability objectives. Will this be addressed? And I'm going to direct that question to Kevin Okimi, the Director of Parks and Open Space.
Yeah, thanks, Melinda. So I think it's important to remember that the secondary plan review is looking at the natural heritage boundaries and making sure that they're consistent with Credit Valley Conservation and the regional kind of mapping. So the most significant areas of trees would be protected through this. But that's not to say that trees won't be removed as part of some of the future developments. And the town is in the process of developing a tree management strategy as well. And so that would be part of the recommendations of that study will be part of this review. And as part of any subdivision developments, the town does look at tree preservation and compensation as a sort of a method to make sure that any trees removed are replaced appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. The next question that we received is, what plans are being taken into account on the secondary plan to ensure that developments do not bypass the responsibility of creating additional open spaces, trails, as well as a proactive plan whereby these areas are accessible in a safe manner for an aging population that may require an additional level of safety and accessibility due to restrictions? So I'll direct that question to Dana Anderson.
Sorry about that. So I was muted and I definitely hit the wrong button, but thank you for the question, Melinda. So I'll unpack that question because there's I think a number of components to it. The first one is what plans are being taken to ensure that developments don't bypass the responsibility for providing open space. So there are requirements under the Planning Act whereby any new development is required to convey open space in accordance with standards under the Act that are required to be conveyed to the town as part of any development application. And we are in the process, of course, with the secondary plan of looking at how and where that open space is provided. And certainly the review of the secondary plan can deal with those latter two elements. In terms of the location of the open space, as well as the design, and definitely in terms of accessibility and usage and connection in terms of trails as well. So those are all areas that are under review, and thank you for that question.
Thanks, Dana. The next question that we received is, the current density stands at 5 units per hectare, yet current projects being put forward are requesting an increase of this maximum of up to 40%. How do we ensure that the secondary plan is respected and adhered, as in many cases, the plan is not being honored? So that question I will also direct back to you, Dana.
Yeah, thanks, Melinda. That's a great question, and certainly a similar question that we dealt with in the Mature Neighborhood Study. One of the responses to that question is that the Planning Act does allow for individuals, owners, developers to make application to amend the plan, as is noted in that question, from the current density to an increased density. And that change that's being requested to the plan is assessed based on the current policies. So one of the things we need to do as part of this review is to look at those policies and ensure that those things that are important in terms of density, in terms of the character of new development, the design of new development, and any application to change or amend those policies or provisions is assessed in accordance with the directions from the plan. So part of our role in looking at the secondary plan is what areas of policy do we need to enhance, to strengthen, to ensure that any application to make a substantial change to policies can be addressed to ensure that the policies themselves are upheld and maintained. So that's a really important component of the work we're doing now, because the end result will be policies that will be tested if someone is seeking a change. And so it's important to have the right policies for the amount of development and the direction around protection of character. So thank you for that question.
Thanks, Dana, and thanks for everyone for submitting your questions via the Q&A function. We are getting a lot, and I just wanted to say we might not get to them all this evening, but as I mentioned, we will be responding to all of them and posting responses on the Let's Talk Halton Hills page. So the next question that we received is, does the secondary plan have any jurisdiction to protect our streets? So that question I'm going to direct to John, Commissioner of Planning.
So thanks for the question, Melinda. Essentially, the secondary plan deals with a number of things, but a key would be both the development that occurs on any given street and also sets out policies that deal with the streets themselves. So if we're looking at the type of development that occurs on a particular street, the mature neighborhood work that was done a few years ago, for example, is designed to govern development that may occur on the street, whether it's infill development or additions or alterations to a house. If you're looking more at the street itself, there would be policies in the secondary plan that speak to, for example, what the preferred cross sections might be, whether it's a more of a rural design or whether it's curb and gutter or whether it's a rolled cross section. So hopefully that answers the question. Thanks, Melinda.
Great, thanks, John. The next question we've received here is regarding heritage. Are there any tools that can be included in the secondary plan to protect heritage buildings and landscapes? And I'm going to direct that to Vanessa Hicks from MHBC.
Hi, thank you for your question. And so I'll just repeat the question. Are there any tools available to protect heritage buildings and cultural heritage landscapes? And the answer is yes. And there are different tools and options that we have to implement as part of this review process. And we will be considering that through this process. Dana, you may have something to add. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Vanessa. Absolutely, as Vanessa indicated, there are a number of tools. And again, in the sort of mini presentations, we go into some detail about what those tools are in terms of the provincial policy statement, the Planning Act, as well as the Heritage Act. We talk about character areas and ways in which policies can help define those areas and protect and enhance those areas. And also, as I mentioned, some of the best practice review work that we're doing will start to identify some approaches that we can utilize or consider as part of our work in the Glen.
Great, thanks, Dana. The next question we received is a policy-related question regarding the Provincial Policy Statement 2020. So it states that the provincial government issued the Provincial Policy Statement 2020 on February 28th, 2020, which then came into effect on May 1st, 2020. The policy states, and they're referring to policy 1.1.1, sustaining healthy, livable, and safe communities. And the policy reads, healthy, livable, and safe communities are sustained by promoting efficient development and land use patterns which sustain the financial well-being of the province and municipalities over the long term. This statement is subject to broad interpretation and has been used in a recent subdivision application to justify increasing housing density from the 5 units per hectare prescribed by the Glen Williams secondary plan to a level of 7 units per hectare. And the question is, does the updated secondary plan, or I guess, will it clarify how the provincial policy statement is to be applied relevant to the requirements spelled out in the Glen Williams secondary plan? So for that question, I will direct to Dana.
Thanks, and I think John might want to add to this, but I would say thank you for that question, and certainly provincial policy as it relates to broader goals and objectives across the province are very important, and that particular section of the provincial policy statement is a very important one in terms of the direction and goals for the province for growth and development. But I would add that there are several other policies, not only in that provincial policy document, but also in regional and local policies, including a policy in the provincial policy statement that actually refers to the most important vehicle for implementing provincial policy as being an official plan, and that would include a secondary plan. And those secondary plans and local plans are intended to look at balancing all the objectives from provincial policy with the local context. And so we know in an area such as Glen Williams, where we have natural heritage resources, cultural heritage resources, and other character areas, that's important for us to look at updating and revising the policies in that context, as well as balancing some of those objectives. So I just wanted to make note that it's just not one particular policy. It's a bigger picture, and it's really the implementation of those policies within the local context that is one of the key things as part of this review and update. So John, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yes, thank you, Dana. Excellent answer. Without question, any application has to be tested against the broad range of policies, and you must read the provincial policy statement as a whole and apply all the policies that are relevant when considering an application. The other thing I would note, which will be interesting as we continue to process applications in the Glen, is that the Glen is not considered an area where significant or major development is anticipated to occur moving forward. So that's a consideration as well. There's to be more of a limited development area as opposed to a major development area. So we'll have to carefully consider that as well as we proceed with this review and consideration of the individual applications. Thanks for the question.
Great, thanks Dana, and thanks John. The next question that we received is there somewhere in the plan that documents what would define what these natural and cultural resources currently are? So with respect to cultural resources, I'll direct that question to Vanessa Hicks at MHBC, and then we'll have Margaret Pugh from WSP respond with respect to the natural resources.
Thank you for your question. And the short answer is yes. And the long answer is in 2 parts. First, heritage resources currently identified in the Glen is limited to those which are designated and listed under the Ontario Heritage Act. The existing secondary plan has the intent to conserve heritage character of the Glen, but one of our key findings is that it does not really identify or define exactly what that heritage character is. And through this secondary plan process, we would be able to do that. Heritage character is often made up of various things, including natural features, vegetation, views and vistas, circulation, landscape features, as well as buildings. These features and their relationship to each other culminates in a unique sense of place. And defining the heritage character of the Glen would enable us to advise on what tools are available to ensure that the heritage character of the Glen is appropriately conserved and enhanced. Thank you.
Great, thanks Vanessa. And the second part of that question I'll direct to Margaret regarding the natural resources that are currently identified in the secondary plan.
Thank you for the question. The natural resources identified in the secondary plan are well summarized in figure 17 from the background report, where we can see the town of Halton Hills, Greenlands designations, the regional Greenland, the regional natural heritage features, as well as some of the Credit Valley conservation wetlands. So if you have some time to take a look at that figure, it can really show you spatially where all of the resources are located.
Great, thanks, Margaret. The next question that we received is, how many people are attending this webinar, not including city staff and consultants? So I think we've unfortunately lost a few, but at one point there were 71 attendees. So it is a well-attended event, so thank you everyone for coming. The next question that we received is, what are the recent traffic calming and pedestrian safety measures that have been taken? And with that question, I will direct to Matt again.
Thank you, Melinda, for this question. There are a number of recent traffic calming improvements that the town has undertook across Glen Williams. In particular, on Prince Street, east of Baraclaw, we have installed a speed hump. On Prince Street, we have installed white edge lines and yellow center lane to narrow the travel lanes of the road. We've installed slow pavement markings on Prince Street. On Wildwood Road, we have installed traverse pavement markings that narrow the travel lanes of the road, slow pavement markings, a parent asphalt on the entrance to Wildwood Road, just west of Ontario Street. And recently we are experimenting with flexible bollards. The initial take on them is that they work very well. Unfortunately, the median bollards were unfortunately vandalized, but we are looking forward to implement more of them as they are proving to be effective in traffic calming. Hopefully that addresses this question.
Thank you, Matt, and don't go anywhere because I have another question coming up for you. The question is, you noted that traffic calming measures have been implemented. However, vehicles are consistently traveling significantly higher than the posted limit on Confederation, both north and southbound. These speeds are seen at all times of day. The new Glen Williams Estates traffic study disregards these speeds and uses a conservative 20 kilometers over the posted. How will this be addressed?
So there are two sections of Confederation Street in Glen Williams. One, which is a minor arterial road that is located between Mullen Place and Wildwood/Main Street intersection. For that, we may look into the future as far as adding edge lines to Confederation Street and through the parking restrictions to narrow the travel lanes and deployment of a radar message board, whether it's temporary or permanent. For Confederation Street north of Wildwood Road to the boundary of Glen Williams, where it changes to 9th line, we are looking at potential implementation of retractable bollards between Mountain Street and Main Street. Ongoing deployment of radar message boards on a temporary basis. We usually are on Confederation quite a bit because residents do provide us a lot of feedback. And on that section of the road, we strongly encourage residents to use a road watch program that is administered by Halton Regional Police Service and allows residents to inform about aggressive driving and speeding in the area. Why this is so important on that section of the road is because majority of the people that travel on that section of Confederation are considered local residents. Hopefully that addresses your question.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. The next question that we have here, if we are currently writing policies that will take several years to enact, how do we ensure development that is now starting will conform with the issues identified tonight, such as protecting the hamlet character and culture, etc.? And I'll direct that question to you, John.
Thanks, Melinda. Well, first of all, we are hoping to have an updated secondary plan presented to council next year for approval, so that is not that far off. Insofar as the applications that we are currently dealing with, as I indicated earlier, we must consider them under the existing policies, but in the event that some of the new policies come into effect before those developments are approved, we have the ability to at least consider those policies and how they might shape those developments if they have not received their final approvals. And that's generally how we would go about doing it. It's sort of a legal term called, they would become relevant policies, but not necessarily determinative policies. So again, we still have to consider the existing plan that we have in effect, but once the new policies start coming into place, we would look for those opportunities to apply them and work with the development community to implement them as best we can. So thank you for the question.
Thanks, John. The next question that we have here is, will density targets identified in the review apply to the entire Glen or only new subdivision development? And I'll also direct that question to you, John.
Thank you, Melinda. It's an excellent question because right now they generally apply for new subdivision development. And I think that's a decision we're going to have to make through this process based on the input we receive from the community. I can tell you right now in the, I'll call it the existing areas, we rely on a minimum lot size type approach, which is effectively the mechanism we're currently using to control density within those more established areas. But I think as part of this review, we'll have to make that determination whether we should extend that notion of a certain cap on the number of units per hectare or acre on a more broad basis. So thanks for the question.
Great, thanks, John. So I think we have time for a few more questions here before we take you to the Let's Talk Halton Hills page. So the next question we've received is there a plan to install a sidewalk from Prince Street to Main Street? And I will direct that question again to you, Matt.
So, thank you, Melinda, for the question. Which section are we talking about? Are we talking about Confederation here, between Prince Street to Main Street? Not sure what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, it wasn't specified, but I would think Confederation Street.
Okay, so when it comes to Confederation Street, north of Wildwood / Main Street, this is something that is identified in our capital forecast for 2026, 2027. However, based on potential development in the area, this area will be evaluated. I don't want to get too much through the details of that because I don't have them, but that's pretty much it as I understand.
Great. Thanks, Matt. So the next question we received is, and I think this will be our last question that we have time for. It was mentioned that the setback guidelines are outdated and not aligned with local or provincial guidelines. Could you please elaborate, is the 20-meter buffer zone around the Glen perimeter still applicable or will it be reduced? And I will direct that question again to you, John.
Thank you, Melinda. So the setback guidelines are based on a lot of direction and guidance that we would have received from CVC back when the secondary plan was being created in the early 2000s. So since then, CVC has updated some of their policies and guidelines, and the region has also implemented a regional natural heritage system, which contains direction and guidelines on buffers. So that's really what the report was getting at and the presentation was getting at. And then the second part of the question relates to the 20-meter buffer zone around the Glen. And that is not the same thing as what we were just talking about, which is more related to natural heritage. This is this notion of a naturalized buffer around the hamlet, trying to establish a very definitive edge. And looking at this buffer and the policies that apply to the buffer are part of our review process. So we're certainly welcoming any comments that individuals may have on those policies and the effectiveness of those policies to date. So thanks for the question, Melinda.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for submitting questions. We greatly appreciate you engaging with us this evening, and we will be sure to respond to all of the questions we didn't get to and post answers on the Let's Talk Halton Hills page. And speaking of the Let's Talk Halton Hills page, I'll now share my screen just to demonstrate what is available there for your review. So I hope everyone can see this okay. When you go to the Let's Talk Halton Hills page, you can click on the Glen Williams Secondary Plan Review. And I can tell by some of the questions and comments already submitted this evening that some of you have actually already accessed perhaps our background report and executive summary and done some reading prior to tonight's event, which is excellent. So for those of you who haven't had a chance, I'll scroll slowly for you. So these are the areas for review and input which Dana presented on this evening and are documented in our background report, which is available under the background information sidebar here. You'll see that the draft is currently posted. It's in draft form as we're still finalizing based on any final comments that are received. There's also this summary, which is the executive summary of the background report. So it provides more of a high level summary of the findings of the background report, including also a summary of the comments that we've received from the project launch event. There's also the materials that were previously posted on here. They're still available and will continue to be available for the lifetime of the project. And that includes the existing secondary plan materials, our project timeline, and a link also to the mature neighborhood study that was done previously. And you'll see here, we have currently active the survey questions. So when Dana mentioned in her presentation that for each of the topic areas, we are looking to receive more open-ended feedback from you in terms of your comments or questions on these areas. And so what you can do is they're all listed on the main page. So when you scroll down, you'll see that the areas are all listed here, and you can click on one. And here is the survey. So these are the additional questions that we're seeking input on. You have the opportunity to just write as much as you like and then submit your comments. And then I just also wanted to point out that there is a map feature that's been accessible since the project was initiated. And if you click on the map feature, it's an interactive map tool. So if you have a specific, and we did receive a lot of specific questions related to specific areas this evening, and it would be useful for our documenting purposes if you do have a specific question on a certain area of the hamlet, that you add a pin and you submit that question or comment directly on the map. So this just provides a great visual and will be really useful as we go forward in the creation of the secondary plan and gathering this input on the areas where you're most interested in providing feedback in the hamlet. So I'd also just like to point out, so if you don't want to actually complete the survey function, There has been and there will always be this general comment section where you can submit comments. You have to sign in and you can just submit general comments on the secondary plan process. So that wraps our presentation this evening. I'll now pass it over to Melissa just to provide any closing remarks.
Sure, thank you, Melinda. And one thing I wanted to add is that if you or someone in the community you know would like to have a paper copy of any of the material, to please let us know. You can email me or email just the planning department. All the information is on Let's Talk, or you can even call us and we will mail out packages to those people. So thank you again, everyone, for participating in this live open house on the Scope Glen Williams Secondary Plan Review. As mentioned previously, this session has been recorded along with all the questions you've asked and will be available on Let's Talk Halton Hills. Our next steps in the process is, or actually our next step is to prepare a public consultation summary report and to begin preparing the draft secondary plan policies. We anticipate having another engagement event to share the draft secondary plan policies this upcoming winter. And information about future engagement opportunities will be available on Let's Talk Halton Hills. Have a good night, everybody.